Shalom and welcome to another edition of the Daily Bread, where we discuss the weekly Parashat. This week's Parashat is Parashat Yitro. It's the fifth Parashat of the book of Shemot, also called Exodus. And my message this week in Parashat Yitro is called the Fruitful Seed. And basically, what happens in this week's Parashat is two key things. Number one, the judges are set up over Israel to help Moshe, and the Torah, or the Ten Commandments, is given at Mount Sinai. So let's start off with a quote. Start off in Matthew 7:19. It says, every tree that brings not forth good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. In this week's Parashat, we see that there's this concept of the great potential of seeds, and how sometimes they can go unused and become unfruitful. And we're going to see how that ties into everything that we're looking at here. The very first point is that it's interesting when we look at Bereshit, God decides to talk to us. And we think, oh, God, God is going to talk to us. What is the first thing he's going to tell mankind? What is the first part of his communication with us? And we find that it's about creation. It's about nature and how everything was created in the natural models, and about seeds and how they work. And that's very intriguing to me. And it also falls in line with the concept of the parable of the sower. In Mark 4:13, it says, know you not the parable, this parable? It's talking about the parable of the sower. He says, how then shall you know all parables? So we see another little pattern here, that all these parables, the one you're supposed to work on is the parable of the sower. And it talks about the seed and how the seed acts in different ground and stuff. The word, so we'll start with the seed. The word zarah is for seed, and it means basically seed, fruit, child, or posterity. And its root word is zarah, which means to yield or to bear, to conceive. And in the ancient Hebrew, it can mean harvest, first seen, which is interesting because we can see that through the seed. We see, essentially it shows that how the seed is tied to ultimately what comes out in the harvest. And we know Mashiach talks about this when he says that you'll know a tree by its fruit. And there's some very interesting things there, because it also says in Isaiah 46:10 that Yodewaheh will declare the end from the beginning. So again, it's this concept of knowing from this seed what the harvest is going to be like. And we see in Ecclesiastes 7:8, it talks about then, what is greater, the beginning or the end? Well, it says in 7:8, better is the end of a thing than the beginning thereof. So even though the seed's important, we know that there's a connection to the end item. And this is why in the scriptures it also says that the day of a man's death is greater than the day of his birth. Because in the model of the seed starts off, but it multiplies. It starts off with just one. But when it goes through, if it's fruitful, it's going to turn into many. And the great power and strength of a seed is how it multiplies itself. And we're going to see how this applies to Israel in the same way, and how it applies to righteousness and the Word of God. So this great thing is this end harvest. And what you see is that one seed is going to turn into, could be 5 or 10 or 20 other seeds. And those seeds, then you could take, instead of starting with one, next year you can plant 10, and you could peel 10 of those off and eat them and turn them into food. And next year your crop's going to be multiplied by 10. And you're going to be able to do that again, have more and more food, and have more and more to plant. And it's going to grow like this. So this seed concept is very intriguing. So in looking at how this applies to this week's Parashat, we start off with Moshe. What happens is his children, his seed, return to it. Yitro, his father-in-law, brings his wife and his children or seed back to Moshe. Now, you're going to see a pattern in the natural model of seed going out and then being regathered back in. And when it's regathered back in, it's expected to have multiplied and become profitable and grown. And so we see this concept. Here comes Moshe's Moshe's seed, his children, are coming back to him. And a lot of times right now in society, the big problem is people aren't taking responsibility for two things: their garden and their seed. Men aren't taking responsibility for their wives or their children that they've had. And what this is doing is it's creating a wilderness out there. It's creating a nasty wilderness, because it's not compared to a cultivated field, which is nice and produces fruit. When you don't cultivate a field, it becomes this thing full of weeds, and it's not very useful. And that's how a lot of people are in this society now, because the family structure is broken and the father is not tending to his garden. That's why people are committing adultery and cheating, and there's divorce, and the children are growing up and they're not learning anything from their father, and they're becoming wild weeds. So we take a look at this and we see that in the next section, what we see is Moshe basically has his seed come back. We all have a personal garden, our wife and our kids, and then Moshe has a larger garden also, which is Yisrael, which he's going to be working in, and he's the gardener. Now this takes us all the way to John, where Mashiach says, "My father is a gardener and I'm the true vine." So we get to see the profession of Yodewahe he is a gardener. And so we see this. Moshe is also a gardener, and many of us are gardeners in our own families. So next we see in Exodus 18:13, it says, "And it came to pass on the morrow that Moshe sat to judge the people, and the people stood by Moshe from morning till evening. And when Moshe's father-in-law saw that all that he did, he said, 'What is this thing that you do to the people? Why do you sit yourself alone, and all the people stand by you from morning until even?' And Moshe said unto his father-in-law, 'Because the people come to inquire to me of Elohim. When they have a matter, they come to me, and I judge between one and another, and I do make them know the statutes of Elohim and his laws.' And Moshe's father-in-law said unto him, 'This thing that you do is not good. You will surely wear away, both you and the people that is with you. For this thing is too heavy for you. You are not able to perform it yourself alone.'" Now this has two interesting patterns here. One is, we see this pattern that there's the one and the many. Again, it's just like the pattern of the seed. It starts with one and the many. And what's greater is the many. And what's not as good is just the single seed. And in the same way, we have the Torah. And the Torah, if it's just, we see people making this mistake in religion. You've got one pastor up there, and what's he doing? He's one pastor and he's teaching the many, right? And the problem is if the pastor's wrong, or if you don't know what's going on other than what you heard from the pastor, you're going to be totally lost. And this one-to-many pattern doesn't work out that well. What you'll see, though, is it's supposed to go from the one to the many. So in the many, which is greater than the one, you can accomplish more. So instead of him being the only judge, over here the one, he was supposed to make judges among Israel, which also shows that what was lacking in Israel was judgment. Among the people, there lacked judgment. So they all came to one source for their judgment, when it should have been that the judgment was among them. And so we see this pattern of the Torah and Torah study, that you're not supposed to, just set up, this is my rabbi and I'm going to go to him when I need to think, because I don't want to think, I want him to think for me. That pattern just does not work. You're supposed to learn the Torah, and you're supposed to learn the judgments of Yodewahe so that you can live them. So that then if there's a lot of people who know it and live it then you're going to have a better community following Torah. So we see this pattern of the one and the many. And this goes back to the seed. So now let's talk about the seed. Luke 8:11 says, now the parable is this. It defines what the seed is. It says the seed is the word of Elohim, or the word of God. So we see that it reminds me of one of the statements I always like. It says, many hands make light work. It is this concept of pushing this out and getting it among the people. Now, the reason this is relevant is you can see this pattern all throughout society. One really good documentary that I suggest you see is called Guns, Germs, and Steel. And it's about how societies progress. And one of the things that they found is the societies who had food that didn't multiply in the same way and didn't keep, like a banana, the people would go and gather it, spend all day gathering up the food, come back and eat it. And then have to go out tomorrow and gather more to eat for that day. And those societies never progressed compared to someone who had wheat, who could gather up a harvest, store it up, and have enough food that they didn't have to go out every day in order to work for the food of that day. And so they had time to progress to other things. And it's the same way. It's the same way with the Torah. As we move the judgment from the Torah, which is one source, into a whole bunch of people who are keeping and know the Torah, then you create something much more powerful in society. Now, one of the interesting things we'll talk about seed is the model of the child. And Paro, Mitzrayim, and Herod, many of them have attacked Israel through the seed, through the children. Their fruitfulness. They try and attack the children all the time. Many of the holidays that are secular, again, they're all based on giving the kids gifts and candy and all this and that, and trying to bribe the children. It's always an attack through the children. And we see this, there's an insidious company called Monsanto, and they are essentially a chemical company that has altered genetically the seeds, and their goal is to take control of food supply. So if you see what they do, they modify a seed genetically so they can patent it, and then wherever that seed is spread, they own whatever it goes. And seeds normally spread and do all this and that. And they've even created seeds called terminator seeds that die after one planting. They become sterile, so that the benefit of the seed, which is I can take one seed, it produces 20 seeds, and I can plant 10 more of those, and they'll produce 100 next time. They've killed that process. And this is what the adversary is always trying to do with Israel, who is fruitful, because they're unfruitful. And they want to make them like themselves. They want to make them sterile and unfruitful. Just like Paro wanted to kill the children of Israel so they wouldn't grow bigger than him. Well, it's interesting that when you compare GMO foods, what Monsanto is doing, you look at abortion. Here's another great example. You know, people are horrified by the concept of the Holocaust. Like, yes, most people, they see that as like the most horrible event that's happened in a long time. And yet, about 6 million people died in the Holocaust. And that was back in between 40 and 45, or 41 and 45. So 60 years ago. Since 36 years ago, in 1975, there's been over 45 million babies killed by abortion. That means that we've basically had a Holocaust every 5 years. We've perpetually had 7 Holocausts since 1975 on children, and nobody bats an eye, and they just think, oh, well, that's not so bad. You know, they don't think of it horrifically in many ways like they do the event of the Holocaust. And it's constantly this pattern of this attack on the children. And look at all the problems with reproductive sterileness, and women can't have, being barren, not having babies, and all these problems. And they link a lot of this even to like the animals that eat the GMO corn having problems with being sterile. So we see this massive attack on fruitfulness, and you got to be aware of that. The key thing to understand too is that the problem with this is that we need to study the Torah. There's a personal responsibility that comes with Torah study, so that we can get it away from just Moshe and out to bring more judgment among Israel. One of the things that identifies this is look at how they had to wash themselves to prepare for the return of Yodewah, for him to come and talk to them. So when they're going to meet, they had to be prepared. And this is the same way that the soil needs to be prepared for the seed, and it's got to be watered, and all this has to happen before any great blessing happens. And the same way when we come back to Mashiach, we're supposed to have cleaned ourselves. Clothes are a model of righteousness. And so we were to not come at our wives, which would make us unclean, wash ourselves and wash our clothes. So we were supposed to clean ourselves up before we came to Yodewah. And what happens if you came unclean? You'd probably get killed. As a matter of fact, even the pattern was to warn Moshe, to warn the people, don't let the people come up here and gaze at me. They want to come up here and take a peek before I'm supposed to come down and talk all this. They'll be shot through. Even a beast that does that be shot through. So all these come Mashiach now people, I'm going to boldly go to the throne. It's ridiculous. You're not clean enough. You're not ready enough. You have a personal responsibility before you meet Yodewah to do something and to make yourself clean and righteous. And this goes into the concept that the seed was cast down, and when it's regathered, it's supposed to be more fruitful than when it went away. Mashiach was cast down to the earth, and he died just like a seed dies in the earth, and then it comes out and it's made more fruitful. I didn't get to go into everything here, but we're going to end with a verse in Isaiah. It says, "So shall my word that goes forth out of my mouth, it shall not return unto me empty, but it shall accomplish that which I please, It shall prosper in the thing where I sent to it. So remember, it is our job to be a fruitful seed, and we will be measured.